if I'm in front of a problem and I have a 50-50 chance of solving it, if I approach that problem optimistically, I already push it into the 55-45 possibility of solving it. So it's just a sense-making state of my mind to be in if I want to be effective.
It might seem like the world is an awful place right now, but Stefan Sagmeister has an alternative point of view, one that might change your perspective a little. His new book, Now is Better, uses historical art and data visualization to highlight just how much life has improved for the majority of people. It's the sort of creative project we've come to expect from Stefan. The designer who formed the New York-based Sagmeister Inc. in 1993 and has since designed for clients as diverse as the Guggenheim Museum, the Rolling Stones and HBO, has also embarked on various art projects that take a closer look at our humanity. Happiness has been a running theme as he has tried to redesign his personality to become a happier and better person. And so for his latest book, the idea came about in 2020 as the world entered a global pandemic. On some initial research, he wanted to explore why things are much better today than they used to be. And so I wanted to find out more about this, the role of happiness in creativity, and why we could all benefit from thinking about the future more optimistically. Thanks for joining us, Stefan. How are you doing? How's your year shaping up?
I'm doing well. Yeah, no, it's the year has been so far a very, very good one. Glad that restrictions are not just easing up, but pretty much gone. And all my friends and my family is healthy. And so, yeah, no, it's. I think it's good.
I like that. Practicing gratitude. And as I said before, there's this British phenomenon, even if our worlds are on fire and everything's going really bad, we will just sort of say, oh, it's fine. We're doing well.
Well, my partner, Karolina, she is Polish, and the regular reply there to the question, how you doing, would be stara bieda, which means, same old misery.
Yeah, that's definitely human nature right there. We just try and take try and sort of have a little bit of humor about it, because life it has its many ups and downs, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Yeah. So what sparked the idea for the book Now is Better?
Well, the real spark of it really came from a dinner. I was a designer in residence at the American Academy in Rome. And despite its name, it's not really a university. It's sort of a gigantic artists, archaeologists, filmmakers in residence place. And they have very good food, so everybody shows up for lunch and dinner, which really means that while you're working in your own studio all day long, you kind of have a salon-like event twice a day. And one night I was sitting next to a very smart-seeming lawyer who told me that what we're seeing right now in Poland and in Turkey, in Hungary, in Brazil at the time really means, or really is, the end of modern democracy. And I didn't really say much to it while we were at dinner, but I went back to the studio that night and looked it up. When did it start? What's the story of this modern democracy? And it turned out that 200 years ago, there was a single democratic country, the United States. 100 years ago, there were, I think, 14 or 15, just after World War I. And now we have 86 properly acknowledged by the United Nations countries who are seen or who are labeled as being democratic. And it's actually for the first time, Wikipedia told me, for the first time in human history that more than half of the population on this earth lives in a democratic system, which showed me that not only was my dinner companion as wrong as he possibly could be, but this very, very well-educated smart lawyer had no idea of the world that he was living in, completely saw it wrong. And that I found was a juicy challenge for a communication designer, because, that's really what I am. And so I looked into this from many other angles. And I found, of course, I was somewhat aware, meaning I definitely had spent some time with Steven Pinker, a professor at Harvard, or also with Hans Rösling, a statistician. It's always a difficult word for me, from Sweden, who was, who I've met a couple of times before. So I was sort of vaguely aware that there was a field of people actually studying not just history, but also long-term data, and that they come up with very different point of views and very, very different kind of developments than, let's say, our very short-term daily news cycle is doing. And I just found that this is interesting, because also when I look at myself, if I'm depressed, I'm not very useful to my surroundings. It's not like that my friends or my partner or my family can get a lot of use out of me. I'm much more useful when I'm in a good shape. And I felt, while I can definitely appreciate that all these bad news, that the short news cycles, basically all media by and large, deliver to us, part of that is really necessary to kick us in the ass and get us into action to do something against all those terrible things. But I feel that we also need a positive reinforcement. And it's not something that I just feel, but I actually looked into how the big social changes from the past decades came about. Let's say the incredibly successful non-smoking campaigns. And there it turns out that both the reinforcement, the positive reinforcement, basically the carrot, if you will, but also the whip was necessary. And right now, I think Twitter or X, TV news, newspapers deliver plenty of the whip. And what I'm trying to do with this book and with a bunch of other things is to give a little bit of the carrot, ultimately, of course, with the goal that we would tackle the many things that are not right with this world. But I think it's sort of, there's a bigger chance to do that from a platform that we've already achieved quite a bit, rather than from a platform of doom and gloom.
Yeah.
So that's a long answer.
No, I think it's great. It's really interesting, because there's a lot of that at the moment. Really, like you say, very smart people who are almost out of hope. And like, what's the point? And, the world is tragic and it's getting worse and I can't cope. And you're right. Where does that come from? Well, the algorithms in recent years, they rely on clicks. You know, the newspapers are under pressure to make money in a kind of post-digital revolution world. And what, gets more people clicking? Annoyingly, negativity.
Including myself, meaning it's not like that I myself as a clicker only click on positive news. Sadly, not at all. Like, I'm just as attracted as everybody else by negativity. I think that a story this is true for personal things. A story of a friend who tells me about another friend doing incredibly bad is just always a little juicier than a success story. It's when we edited our documentary film about happiness, where I myself featured in quite a bit. Every bit where I looked like a complete asshole was very juicy. Every bit where I looked fantastic and was like, a superior human being was so unbelievably boring that we really couldn't use it. It's just, I think it's ultimately also determined by our prehistoric ancestors' brains, who needed the amygdala as a shortcut for negative news to basically keep them safe. We, of course, in many ways have outrun evolution. And I think that amygdala could possibly be even smaller than it already is, and maybe shut down that shortcut for negativity, or at least limit it a little bit. And I think that we all would be much better informed, and ultimately I think would get a more total and possibly truer image of this world if we would also look at long-term developments that seem to always fall, in between the cracks, because things that go well tend to improve slowly and don't really work on Twitter. Meaning even though Max Rosier, a scientist at Oxford, he's German, but he has a fantastic site called Our World in Data from the university in Oxford. And he has a wonderful quote. He says that the headline, 135,000 people escaped extreme poverty today, could have run every single day for the past 25 years truthfully. It's just not news because it's happening every single day. But in many, many other ways, let's say, if you would publish a newspaper only every 25 years, no doubt that would be the headline, because that would be the unbelievable sensation of how many people escaped extreme poverty. But if I would go now out on 14th Street in New York with a little microphone and interview 100 people, what do you think? Are more people living in extreme poverty worldwide now or 25 years ago? Most people, my guess would say, no, it's worse now than it used to be. But it just isn't. And I think that doesn't stop us. That information shouldn't, and I think doesn't stop us from working more towards that. But I think that awareness could help us in seeing that, considering we've already achieved quite a bit, the UN thinks that we are actually going to see the end of extreme poverty within our lifetime, and that we can achieve and really accomplish more.
Yeah, the future's bright. I mean, what's interesting, I find, are the artworks in the book, in a sense, then a response to maybe some rosy retrospection, that good old cognitive bias where we judge the past more positively than the present?
Absolutely.
Was that the kind of feel? Yeah, it's quite fascinating, isn't it? Because nostalgia is a powerful thing. I mean, in people's fondest memories can come, they can come out of difficult times, for example. So like in America, when the older generation in the 1970s were asked, about their nostalgia, it wasn't the booming 1950s that they reminisced about. It was, in fact, the 1930s after the stock market crash, that era of Great Depression, when there was a communal spirit and everybody had to come together and, survive through it type thing.
I mean, the entire world of, let's say, a politician like Donald Trump only works if things used to be much better than they are now. Make America great again only works if it used to be so great and now it isn't. But if you actually probe a little bit, when was it great? Well, 10 years ago, it couldn't have been because Obama was in charge. So Republicans certainly wouldn't think it was great 10. If you look at it 20 years ago, well, we had 9/11. If you look at it 50 years ago, it couldn't have been because it was Reagan who ran under the exact same headline, Make America Great Again. So you would have to go back, I don't know, into the Civil War time. Well, it certainly wasn't great then. So it's this sort of like cloud of uncertainty somewhere in the past. Things must have been fantastic. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at real proper history, and it's a big pity that most of us in school, learned about a ruler and about the war, but didn't really learn about social history, as in how did people actually live? What were their lives like? What did they eat? What were, like, how did they sleep? What was their house like, And because what we see now, of course, is the ruler's house. That looks pretty fantastic because he spent most of the money, most of the complete money on his own house, and whatever was left over was spent on a war. And social spending was non-existent, really.
There's an excellent museum in Dublin based on the tenements, and it's basically reenacted how people used to live. And it would be in these kind of terraced, 5-story properties, very poor. And a whole family would live in one kind of tiny room. And I walked into it, and I don't know why, but I burst into tears. I was like, oh my God. I think you have to kind of really sort of be there to actually, even begin to understand how bad people had it in our kind of great-grandparents' generation.
I mean, one of the more chilling numbers I came across was the regular diet, or the average diet in France 200 years ago was the same as it was in Rwanda in the 1970s, when Rwanda was the most malnourished country in the world. So basically 90% of Europe in the 17th century was just living in extreme poverty, ruled by a tiny class of blue-blooded people, really. Many of them were owned by their masters. So in some sort of slavery, meaning where I come from in Western Austria, we were owned by the Duke of Montfort. And all the way now, of course, the area where I am from is very wealthy through tourism. Every farmer seems to have a 7 Series BMW in front of their shed. But as little as 90 years ago, in the 1930s, the families in my neighborhood had to send the kids to southern Germany to be fed through the summer and fall because they really couldn't feed their own children. My great-great-grandparents, 6 of their kids died. And it was not that they were, particularly stricken by terrible luck. It was just basically, this is what happened to pretty much every family. You had a ton of kids and half of them died. But not as babies, but as 2, 4, 6, 8-year-olds, the kind of sorrow they must have gone through is immeasurable. Now, if you ask parents, what's the possible worst thing that could happen in your life? It's mostly like the death of a child. That's sort of the event that tests every marriage, that basically is the absolute worst thing that could happen to you, basically.
Yeah, I think it 200 years ago that it was only half of all children born would make it to 7 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Insane.
We have one of my cousins is a local historian, and so we have a very, very proper, well-documented family history. And my great-great-grandparents, 6 of their kids died. My great-grandparents, 5 of their kids died. My grandma was the first one in my family to be able to vote, and she had to wait until she was 42. To be able to do so. So this was a very, very different world that has absolutely nothing to do with, let's all try to go back to that world. It was awful.
Yeah, exactly. So in the modern day, when people are struggling, I guess when we sort of look at nostalgia and how people look back on those times when they were going through tough times, but they look back on them with, fondness almost. In that case, if we look at happiness itself, is there happiness in the struggle?
I think there is something, and we have to, let me go back 1 second. I think a fine definition to think about happiness to me always was to look at it from a time perspective, like how long it lasts. And then we can differentiate between the happy moment, that already includes possibly something like an orgasm, but also be having that second on the top of the mountain feeling elated. Then there would be something that's closer to satisfaction, like, whatever, on the couch with your dog on a Sunday afternoon that can last for hours. And then there is something like finding the thing that you're good for in life. It's more connected to meaning in life. And those three things really are, even though they all run under that big term of happiness, they're really different things. I mean, an orgasm and finding the thing that you're good for in life are two very different things. And,
absolutely.
so I think the moment that you mentioned is probably something like there is a certain satisfaction connected with specifically after the struggle of having overcome the struggle. And there hopefully is some sort of learning experience attached to it. And I would think learning is also a very satisfying emotion to have, a very satisfying experience. Like I think that ultimately evolution made learning satisfying because it wants us to learn. It wants us to basically improve and get better. But the struggle itself, while you're struggling, I think is not a happy moment. The struggle itself is definitely, clearly, meaning as the word says, as the term says, something to be overcome, something that we are happy when it's over.
Is this what you found then? Because you've been on a bit of a mission, haven't you, to, find what makes us happy? I mean, is this ultimately what you found? I mean, are you yourself a happier person from going on this, or is the very kind of effort of trying to make yourself happy made you miserable?
That's a very, very good question, and I can get into that. So ultimately, for those who don't know, we've done a movie on happiness, we've done a big exhibition on happiness. And I have to admit, in the very beginning, when I had the thought of starting this, I thought it was an interesting subject for a communication designer to tackle. But also, I of course hope that all the research that this project will force me to do might just have a little side effect of making me happier. And ultimately, in the film and in the exhibition, I pursued 3 strategies that scientists thought would be most effective in improving my overall well-being, which really was meditation, medication, and cognitive therapy. And I did all those 3 things, and I think all had some sort of effect. If I would have to do it again, if I would have to go back to one of these strategies, I would choose cognitive therapy, which I felt out of those 3 was actually the one that, yes, I needed to do the work, but made possibly the biggest difference. But in general, what I found was that a sentiment that our scientific advisor, Jonathan Haidt, had already written as a conclusion to his book, that I had known before I even started the project, because it was one of the very first books that I read on this subject, that this sentiment turned out to be exactly true, but me understanding it in my brain didn't really allow me to properly implement it into my life. And only the intense work through the film, through the exhibition, within that subject, really ultimately made me implement it. And so the sentiment really is that I shouldn't run after happiness or try to become happier. But what I can do is I can try to lift my relationships, both the close ones like my partner or family, but also the far away ones like, casual acquaintances. That I can try to lift the quality of those relationships up to a level where here and there certain kind of happinesses can come out in between unexpectedly. And I can try to do the same with my work, and I can try to do the same with something that's bigger than me. For many people, that might be some environmental cause or a church or a religion or something like that.
Yeah.
And I found, I think 2 years after we finished the film, that I've, without really consciously trying, had done a good number of these things. I had stopped doing commercial work. I had really, specifically in work, really lifted up the quality of the work by making certain decisions, by saying, okay, I've done enough of that. I've done enough work in branding. Not because I hate it now. I think it's super important that good people are doing branding because it's very visible and it has a big influence on the way our world looks like. But I felt I've done enough of it. And I should pursue things that are meaningful now to me at this point in my career or life. And that had wide implications as far as also something that's bigger than me is concerned, because the one that I pursued 2 years after was really beauty, and beauty clearly is bigger than me. But also it actually bled into my relationships too, because it forced me to seek new people who are either professionally dealing with beauty, like Dr. Helmut Leder, who is a scientist in the world of aesthetics and psychology, and so forth and so on. So ultimately, I can say that I don't really keep daily lists of it anymore, but my gut feeling is that, was a long answer to your question, that I am actually now on a daily basis happier than I was, let's say, 15 years ago before I started this whole project. So yes, I think it was successful. Yes.
That's great to hear. I'm really happy with that. And you touch on relationships. I mean, you've obviously done a lot of research and you've seen this 85-year Harvard study where they've found that the absolute number one thing that makes us happy and even helps us live longer is those positive relationships. And by positive, totally. I suppose people that lift you up, those deep and meaningful relationships. If we invest more time in them, then we get back the rewards. And it's nice to hear that that's worked well for you too.
And, it's a friend of mine actually had this idea, and I did the same, and it worked brilliantly, is basically just now that most of us have some sort of calendar system that's digital. Basically, both my friend and me later, I just copied him, went through the last year of my calendar, looked at all the meetings that were in there, and rated them plus, and minus, and minus. And Brilliant. If I had a person in there that I had meetings that just had double minuses and triple minuses, I basically just eliminated that person from my life. I just basically said, okay, I'm not going to work with that. In my case, actually, it turned out that these were working relationships, not luckily, not even personal relationships. But my personal meetings or my dinners and things like that, they're also all part of my calendar. So I was actually happy to see that I had nobody in my personal life that I had that I had to give minuses
Thank
for
goodness.
the dinners. But I definitely had some in my professional life. And I just said, okay, easy. I'm not going to work with that person anymore. And it didn't even need a big breakup or anything. I just stopped calling and that was it.
I think that's part of happiness, though, that kind of ability to naturally edit people and things that aren't working for us.
Yes.
I think that's one thing that social media does really badly. It doesn't allow you to move on and grow because you've always got this foot in the past when really you've changed, you've grown as a person. That those people that you used to go to school with, not all of them, some of them, they've changed too. And I think that's part of the reason why social media might make some people miserable, because you kind of are forced to stay in this kind of, unmovable scenario where you feel like you just can't let go of things that aren't working for you. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. It's meaning that same psychologist or scientist who I worked with on the Happy film is actually he's working on a big book on the effects of social media and specifically the negative effects it has on teenagers. And he has pretty solid numbers on basically whenever the self-facing camera was introduced, and it apparently, I think it was introduced in a staggered way in various countries, you can see that self-harming went up and, suicide rates went up among young people. Yes.
That's terrible. It's terrible, isn't it? And also, I think with all the kind of problems that are in the world in terms of polarization, the kind of politics you have both this side of the pond and your side, I think Jack Dorsey said, one of the founders of Twitter, he said that one of his biggest regrets was adding the like feature on Twitter because that changed the world. And I think it was actually your friend Jonathan Haidt who said that when that was introduced, I think it was possibly 2015, that's when things started to go really sort of volatile online and just making people miserable. It's not a healthy thing. I'm not a massive fan of social media, even though it's been very good for my business and making connections. I do find it's a massive double-edged sword, and it's just how you handle it that determines, your sanity, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, in my case, I have a pretty substantial Instagram account, and what I do is I review young designers' work. And I tend to review, actually, just before this interview, I probably wrote a dozen reviews, and I probably write another 5 right afterwards. And then I post them up onto a program and I schedule them automatically. And then I have nothing to do with it, because during the day, it is impossible for me, or I can't give this any brain space of how people commented or that I would comment on the comments. Then it's in my head, and I don't think it deserves the kind of attention. Like I agree, there's real advantages to this. I mean, there's advantages for me. Like, I found a good number of people on Instagram that I'm now happily working with, and that we have great relationships that I would not have known if I wouldn't have followed them on Instagram. And I hope that my account also yields some advantages to young designers that I try to critique. But so ultimately what I'm trying to do is I try to basically, have my cake and eat it too, take the advantages, but try to avoid most of the disadvantages. And I do know people that are very successful on Instagram that comment all day long on the comments that they receive. And if you're a writer and this is your livelihood and your Instagram account is basically the extension of your writing, then I can understand that, because it's just basically all part of your professional front. But for anybody else, it's like, I want to work during the day. I want to dedicate my life and my energy to what I'm doing. I don't want to be in cyberspace and worry about somebody not agreeing with the comment, with my critique, or whatever, attacking me about something else. And it's strange, because even there, negativity so much trumps positivity. I can have 25 really fantastic comments on a post, and if I check it, if there is one negative one, that's the one that sticks in my brain. And it's it makes no sense. But that's just how it is. And I feel many, many, many people through the amygdala and a couple of other factors feel that way.
Yeah, it's human nature. I mean, LinkedIn's another one of them, especially in the design industry. Somebody might share their latest brand identity project, and then a lot of the community all pile in and say, this is terrible. And then they'll all be trying to, add their value, I suppose, and say why they think it's wrong and why it should be better and why they could have done a better job. I mean, it's all very kind of mind-blowing, and there's all this information, and it's constant. And you just think, gosh, why don't we all just get away from our screens and into nature and meet a really positive, good friend in real life and stop wasting our time on these stupid things that are just designed to take our attention away all the time.
You couldn't have said it better. Absolutely true.
Took the words right out of your mouth.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, very good.
Well, I think in terms of work and happiness, we can find those moments of contentment when we're in a flow state as well, can't we?
Sure, absolutely. I think there's a guy called Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi who wrote very eloquently about this state. It's, I think it's also the reason why video games ultimately are so addictive, because they are designed to put you into a flow space, basically into a space where you work very hard at the edge of your abilities through the various levels. You always are at the edge of your abilities in a video game. To the point where you forget all your other problems and really concentrate on that task at hand. And I'm convinced that that's basically the extreme core of why they work so well. I have to say it's also the core because for a very short time, for 1 year when I was very young, I was addicted to a particular game to the point that we played it so well that we not only did we finish it every single time, but we basically played it, we timed it like who could finish it even quicker.
Wow.
And
what was it?
It was on Atari. That's how long it was ago.
Well, I might remember. I had an Atari.
It was called Crystal Castle, the game. It was a kind of like a puzzly sort of game where you had to navigate a ball through a maze. In any case, it was not a happy year. I remember it. It was not a happy year. So here and there, I have friends who are big gamers. And here and there, I take an hour or two out to see just what's going on, because I find it absolutely amazing, the quality of the games that are produced and the depth and the width and the amount of work that goes into creating them. I mean, these
it's incredible,
really unbelievable worlds that are so difficult to create and do. So I'm here and there spending an afternoon in absolute utter amazement of what's out there, but I am not partaking because literally I'm just afraid that I would have another I'm afraid of another thing that demands my attention that's screen based.
Yes.
Pretty much for the reasons that you've outlined, because I also once, because I know that this year on Crystal Castle, that time was not well spent. And by not well spent, I don't feel sorry that I wasted it. I feel that I didn't waste it enjoyably ultimately. Like that I felt not empowered, not active, I think ultimately not well.
Passive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just putting yourself in a passive, unhealthy state.
Yeah. So I have no desire to go back there. And as you say, much rather meet a couple of friends for dinner, which I do, on a almost daily basis. Yeah.
That's great. Out every night for dinner.
Pretty much so. Yeah. I mean, I live in Manhattan. I don't cook. So if I don't go out, I order in, but I mostly go out. Yeah. I pretty much every night.
What do you order in if you're staying in, if it's a pajama evening?
Well, then I have a Italian home cooking restaurant that delivers themselves, so you don't have to go through any of the apps, which means that the food really is here in 10 or 15 minutes. Not that I'm in a hurry, not at all, but it comes very, very fresh. And it's sort of like your Italian grandma would cook it, which
Great.
I don't want all the time. When I go out, I'd much rather have newish cooking where, being a designer, where there are new ideas being part of the food. We went to a very new, very not avant-garde, but we went to a very new idea sort of Mexican restaurant last night, and it was absolutely delicious. But
Great.
for ordering in, I'm not that big of a fan of the apps, mostly because if the food has been standing around for 20 minutes underneath a heating lamp, it's just not the same. And, I often order in from restaurants that I go to, so I know the difference. And if New York, specifically after the pandemic, has pretty high restaurant prices. So you basically pay $100 a head. You can without wine.
You might as well go to the restaurant. I mean, in that case, how did you cope during the pandemic when you couldn't see anyone, couldn't go out? Did it really sort of have an impact on you?
I was lucky because on two fronts, Jessica and I had separated our businesses half a year or 3/4 of a year before the pandemic. So I was brilliantly set up to work remotely by then.
Right.
And my partner moved from London to New York 3 months before the pandemic.
Phew.
And we actually transformed a long distance relationship where I think we both were sort of a little bit on the fence about, is this getting somewhere? Maybe, maybe not, who knows, kind of thing, into a real wonderful relationship. And I would almost say that COVID helped bring us together. So I have no complaints on that front.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. Oh, so going back to cognitive therapy, have you read Humankind by Rutger Bregman?
I actually have. Yes, I have.
I love it. And I love that he shares that there's this radical idea that most people deep down are pretty decent. And I think I've been really grasping onto that in my life, in my career, when the world can feel like it's very cruel. I just feel that that's a real comfort. And is that in itself part of the cognitive therapy that you came to understand? Just that kind of working with negative little bubbles of assumptions that come up in our minds, just sort of combating them, kicking them and saying, well, actually, most people are decent.
I mean, I would definitely share the overall trajectory of that book. I have a suspicion that he's cherry picking his examples. Nevertheless, I think it is somehow related to cognitive therapy, but the way that I experienced it was, of course, with a therapist, which I think does make a big difference. It's just, I think that the reason most self-help books don't really work is not because the content is bad. It's just that the connection of reading a book between the book and the reader is too loose to really seep into the life of the reader and make a measurable, significant difference, which in many cases I think leads to actual frustration, because the reader might think, oh, all the other readers are able to change their lives after reading this book. It's just me who seems to be unaffected by this thing. So I think that a actual therapist with actual therapy, just even if that person says very similar things than what you could read in a book, just makes the difference of a much tighter connection. And,
Yeah.
Basically in a similar way that you probably have a bigger chance of losing weight if you have a personal trainer than if you buy, two weights. If you order two weights from Amazon and try to figure this out yourself.
It's so true because it's tailored, isn't it? Tailored to your
Yeah.
needs.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
they will actually get under the skin. And I suppose a lot of our problems come from childhood, don't they? And the kind of voices in our head, and figuring out why those voices exist and why they say what they say.
Yeah. And I would say the very core of cognitive therapy is really looking at my own thinking patterns, then looking at my own reality and see if those two things really are the same. Like if I think properly about my own reality, and if it turns out that I don't, readjusting that. And there is, my cognitive therapist gave me homework. There were things to do. There were things to train my brain onto. I found it a very doable thing in very much in the vein as going to a gym. Meaning if you go to the gym once a month and don't do exercises in between, the change is not going to be,
No.
not only not measurable, but also you're not going to notice anything. But if you do it twice a week and you really do some exercises in between, you're going to see change. And I think it's very, very much the same with cognitive therapy. And so I find it kind of soothing, that notion that the more I work on this, the better the results will be. And it's ultimately up to me if I really want to see those changes. And that's also why I'm saying that if I'm getting again at a juncture in my life, which I might as well do, where I see, I really don't appreciate this part of my life, and I really would like to change that. Yeah, I think I would definitely book another, 3 months, maybe 6 months worth of sessions with a therapist and really work on them. And I think that chances that I will be able to achieve that change are good.
That's great. That's wonderful to hear. Do you think us creatives choose a bit of a difficult path? And, a lot of the kind of pressures we face, the struggles, do you think that kind of like impacts our happiness? This kind of, it's a great career, but it comes with its difficulties for sure.
But I'm not sure if it comes with more difficulties than other careers. Or I definitely remember being part of a dinner.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I remember being part of a dinner of two friends of mine who were in a relationship. Two women who, one of them was a chef and the other one was running a graphic design studio. And their argument was who has the more stressy profession.
Interesting.
And I basically just followed their arguments and have to say that I came out on the side of the chef. I knew the arguments very well from running a graphic design studio, and I definitely appreciate the fact that we can be very stressed. But I really don't believe it quite compares with running a kitchen. I think that running a kitchen is just more of the moment, and the demands to your time are more significant. Yeah.
That's really, positive, because you can, not that you wish anybody else to have a miserable life, but it's actually nice to just sort of compare and say, well, actually, at least I'm not doing that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I suppose your friends in Manhattan, where you live, are very varied and have very interesting careers. So you'll see this broad spectrum of people and hear of their
I do.
days. And that's, again, I suppose, very helpful to have living in a city, in a hub where you are surrounded by these interesting people, these smart, interesting people.
But I think one of the big attractions of living in New York is the fact that there are a lot of people here who want to do something. Like it's much more, let's say, action oriented than Austria, where I come from.
11th happiest place in the world.
It sure is, and I think that meaning when I was studying in Vienna, one of the favorite pastimes was to sit in cafes and talk about your ideas. And there would always be one or two people at the table who say, oh my God, this will never work, ever, ever. And you talked about your idea so much that you kind of lost the need to actually do it. And I think that's a different kind of situation here. And I would say there is also a certain kind of foundation friendliness, not just in New York, but I think in the United States, that in Europe is often misunderstood for surface related matters that, people don't go deep. But it definitely has the incredible advantage that you can actually meet a lot of people. So among my friends, there are people who are in very different professions than I am, that I might have bigger difficulties meeting in Europe because you tend to have your friends from your own profession, or it's a little bit more siloed, I would say.
Gosh, it's so interesting to chat about that. That was going to be one of my questions. Why, do you think where you live helps? And you've just answered my question. And is that why you left Austria?
I left Austria because I really always enjoyed very big cities. When in break times while I was studying, I always went to London because London was, the big city in Europe, the real metropolis in Europe. And I found New York to be, even a bit more concentrated on that, considering London is quite spread out. And, specifically Manhattan is very dense, and I very much enjoy that density. But I think just in general, the choice of being able to live where you want to, which of course is not a choice for absolutely everybody in this world, but it's a choice for many of us now. And it wasn't a choice for my father's generation. Of course, people in my father's generation also did move from Austria, but it was it was a crazy decision that you probably didn't go back to. If in the 1930s, you decided to emigrate. You didn't go to United States. You emigrated to the United States. Chances were you stayed there. You made a life decision. Not like myself, where I, after studying, got a scholarship to study 2 years in New York and had a chance to basically decide, do I like it or don't I like it? That sort of thing. So I think those freedoms have incredibly improved. It's and obviously, 500 years ago, there was no such choice. There was just no technical way for you to reach the United States. And if you would have, you probably wouldn't have wanted to be there.
Sure.
So it's, I find that to be, one of the great advantages of being born late. And I would say that from my own perspective, if I would be offered a time machine, I would for sure 100% go into the future. No doubt about it. It would be super interesting to see what's happening in, let's say, 2070.
Oh my
like
goodness.
when AI is, extremely established and part of everybody's lives, like how that turned out. Did we actually become a multi-planetary species like some people want us to be and work very hard for us to achieve? It would just be like how are the side effects, the unwanted ones of many of these things? I just think it's will be fascinating, and I'm for sure not going to live long enough to see it. But while I am totally 100% fine with my age, and I wouldn't want to go back to be 20, I do feel a little bit sorry for not being able to live through that.
Yeah, I would agree. And what do you think is going to happen? Are you excited about AI?
That's too difficult of a question for me to have a proper answer. I think it's like we're doing. I would say so far we've mostly been playing around, but right now we're working on a design project that involves AI. It's if you want it to do. If you have an idea of what you want to achieve, it's still quite difficult to mold into that thing that you really are looking for. If you don't know what you want and you just basically want to, send off prompts, then it's fine. But if you actually know what you want, it's much more tricky. And the bigger question is difficult because there are many, many people who know much more about me and who I trust in these matters. And I would say those people, the ones that I know, are kind of evenly divided between, yes, this is going to be fantastic, and no, this is going to be the biggest mistake we've ever done. So, yeah, I'm somewhere stuck in the middle.
Yeah, chewing it over and seeing, trying to sort of understand it and read about it. And I suppose it'll be a conversation that pops up at many of your nights out in Manhattan.
It absolutely is. And it pops up, of course, constantly at all the talks and design conferences. I mean, I don't think I did a Q&A in the last 6 months where not one of the questions was exactly that. And I'm actually sorry that my answer has always been this sort of wishy-washy. It's that I don't have a more concrete one. I mean, in general, I would say because of myself having looked back into the long term over the past 5 years and really have looked at various technical developments over time, it just always seemed that when a new big development came in, there were side effects. Some of them we could predict, some of them we couldn't predict. And we basically had to work on these side effects before development could go further on. Mm-hmm. But in general, it just seemed that with every new development, we seem to have ultimately used it more for the better than for the worse. Like with the invention of the hammer, more people built houses with it than killed their neighbors. And so from that history, I believe that ultimately we'll also do more good than bad things with AI, which still leaves the question, of course, open. Will AI itself do something bad? And that I really am not expert enough to have a sensible opinion on.
But if all we've talked about in this, conversation, if all we've sort of discussed is that we have to have optimism and hope and try and avoid the gloom, ultimately, I think our humanity will guide it in the right direction.
I mean, I myself, of course, do believe that optimism makes rationally sense, because if I'm in front of a problem and I have a 50-50 chance of solving it. If I approach that problem optimistically, I already push it into the 55-45 possibility of solving it. So it's just a sense-making state of my mind to be in if I want to be effective.
Yeah. So that gives me hope, Stefan.
Excellent.
That makes me happy. We're not going to see Skynet's Terminator 2.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Laurie Anderson actually wrote me a beautiful note, like when she said that when she saw the book, her day, and she leafed through the book and her day wasn't going very well, but leafing through the book already made her feel better. So if this book can have an effect on other people in the same way as it had on Laurie Anderson, then I think I did my job well.
Well, thank you so much, Stefan. It's been great chatting with you, and you've definitely made me feel happier.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks to Stefan Sagmeister for joining us this week. To learn more about anything we've covered, visit our show notes at creativeboom.com/podcast. Next week, we'll be chatting with Brian Hollinsworth to learn more about the art of self-promotion online. Brian is a brand consultant and graphic designer based in London who has made a name for himself in the creative industries thanks to his expertise in social media and content creation. We'll cover it all: how to build your personal brand, which platforms to use and why, and how to stand out amongst all that overwhelming noise. If you haven't already, please subscribe via any of the usual channels, and every Monday you'll get conversations with creatives to uncover the secrets to success and all the practical advice, funny stories and honest wisdom that will help you build a booming creative career. Until next time.